Good day, dear colleagues, wherever you are. And again, it is to the fourth industrial revolution that it is possible for us to have this virtual social justice cafe. Ordinarily, the social justice cafe is a meeting over lunch with brown bags that are provided by us and having difficult conversations over a cup of tea and scones or whatever we can provide. Due to COVID-19, everything has gone online, and here we are. But what has happened to us during COVID-19 shows that the fourth industrial revolution has many potential gifts and challenges. And one of the gifts is that it can unite in that we can meet wherever we are without any flights, without accommodation, and the time lost in between. We can share information easily from wherever we are all over the world without going to libraries and things like that. So those are some of the positive things coming from the fourth industrial revolution. But you'll agree with me that it also brings with it some difficulties. And much as it can unite and advance equality, it can also divide us further, as we have seen from the fracture that comes from the vitriol that people share in social media platforms. It can also exacerbate inequality, as we have seen when commerce went online, governance went online, and general communication, including academic communication, went online. Some were further left behind. While some were further left behind, some got richer, as we saw in the news about how, for example, Amazon has become far more richer during the process of the fourth industrial revolution. Today, we bring you experts in the field that will talk to us about this dichotomous potential of the fourth industrial revolution when it comes to social justice. But more importantly, how do we harness the opportunities available in the fourth industrial revolution to advance social justice in all areas of life, particularly education and socio-economic inclusion? Among us, we have Lindiwe Matali, founder and CEO of Africa Teen Gigs. She has won numerous awards for the pioneering work she's been doing to get children, including rural children, to be participants instead of consumers in the fourth industrial revolution. She's training young ones to do various things, and I'm not going to tell you what is she doing because I don't want to spoil the fun. We have a professor of law, a professor in the education department at Stellenbosch University, Professor Aslam Fatah, who has written extensively about the fourth industrial revolution and its various potencies, and he too will be talking to us about what has happened with leapfrogging us. When some community were still battling with the second industrial revolution, and here we are in the fourth industrial revolution. Remember that South Africa is a country of two worlds, one that is rich, affluent, and modern, and one that is left behind. And then Mr. Derek Swart, an attorney, will be talking to us about cyber law and other legal implications of the fourth industrial revolution, again with a view to shedding light on the booby traps when it comes to equality and building a united world, and also talk about opportunities available for advancing social justice. And one of us who has been part of this social justice cafe The Social Justice Network, and Scopra is Kat Walker, talented young graduate who is doing her master's currently at Turin University in Italy. She has also written about social justice generally and about the fourth industrial revolution. She is also going to share her views on social justice and the fourth industrial revolution without wasting any more time and keeping you waiting. I give you Miss Lindiwe Matlali, founder and CEO of Africa Teen Geeks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Professor Madonsela. You know, I've been following you for a long time, and I have so much respect. And it's an honor to be here to have an opportunity to engage with you. This goes as like the highlight of my life. But I'm really going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, purely specifically in the basic education. Um, the COVID-19, what it has exposed is the huge inequalities that we have in our country. Well, actually everywhere globally. And what we've seen is the kids who are coming from very rich families have not been affected by COVID-19 at all, because they were able to immediately move online to move those classes, and the majority were not. Actually, Kenya in March, they announced that they considered the school year lost. That meant 250 million kids alone in primary and secondary school have lost the academic year this year. A House of Lords report in 2017 declared that digital literacy should be the fourth pillar of a child's education, alongside reading, writing, and mathematics, and be resourced and taught accordingly. But as everybody who knows me will know, I'm very passionate about teaching kids coding and really and trying to bring as many kids as we can. But the country that we live in, a lot of these children that we're trying to help are not even able to access the opportunities that are there, and purely because of obviously we know the lack of resources. Data is one of the most expensive in South Africa. And right now, currently, the life chances of an average child is not determined by their ability or and the results of their hard work and determination, but the color of their skin, their address, the wealth, and the wealth of their parents. While talent and creativity is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And many times I listen to people when they talk about, all we need to do is to just create equal opportunities. That is not enough, because when during the lockdown, Africa Teen Gates, within 4 days, we launched an online school for grade R to 12. And we've seen a lot of the parents, it was mainly for kids in public schools. And we only reached 500,000 kids. There's 12.9 million children currently in the registered with DBE. And the reason for that is they could not access our classes. They were online, they were live, they were exciting as much as we were excited about the reach, but we knew that a lot of the kids that needed it couldn't. And then came the issue of whether should the schools be opened. Initially I was one of those who thought maybe we shouldn't, but then if you think about that, I started looking at my kids. My kids did not lose any day of school, because teachers started sending them work. They were able to go to school. So for children that are poor, as they had to, the school had to be open for them, because otherwise the achievement gap was going to continue to widen. And so we cannot really talk about social justice or talk about justice without dealing with issues of inequality? And what kind of policies that are there? Um, for me, what is also frustrating is for Africa, this is not the first time we've been, parts of Africa have been on lockdown. A few years ago, we had the Ebola crisis in West Africa. So a lot of those kids were not at school, but obviously because it didn't affect the whole world, there was not a lot of media attention to what happens to the kids in those countries that were affected by the Ebola. But there was no plans or any policies made to say, if this were to happen again, how do we make sure that our children, continue to study? And also looking at this, it's not just about the issue of access to the internet, it's also the issue of access to electricity. 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to electricity. So even if you can say, let's put all our content online, it's not going to help everybody. So because opportunity dances with those who are already on the dance floor. And for the majority of of people, of children in Africa, they are, so opportunities continue to miss them. In 2017, MIT released a research report called the Lost Einstein. It's a reference to people who could have had highly impactful innovation if they had been able to pursue the opportunities they deserved based on their talent and creativity alone. And what they found was that children who grow up exposed to a particular type of inventor or innovation are far more likely to follow that path or become innovative themselves. Or even girls who grow up around, knowing of an innovator, then they tend to become one themselves. So can you imagine how many great ideas and brilliant people who could have contributed to society were lost purely because they were born on the wrong side of town, on the wrong family? And moving forward, the opportunities that COVID-19 has brought is that we need to speak up more about, how policy is done. Because sometimes, if I think about the issue of the cost of data, I mean, there was this campaign called Data Must Fall, and it was all over the news, and then it died down, and nothing really happened. So there was no follow through in making sure, because now, if that campaign or succeeded, many kids probably would have been able to access education. And how are we going to also make sure that the infrastructure that is actually needed, and dealing with obviously the elephant in the room, corruption, with the people that are given the responsibility to do this work, are doing the work the way they're supposed to do. So for me, I really feel like it's very important that we integrate the skills, like 4IR skills in basic education, because if we don't do that, we're going to continue to have Africa where we just consume technology that comes from outside, or a situation that are called exploitation. If there's a lot of buzz and excitement about the tech sector in East Africa, but I read a research a few years ago that said actually only 2% of the tech companies in East Africa are owned by Africans. So which means the West is very much interested and passionate to invest in Africa, but not in Africans. So what do we need to do to make sure that we can, as Africans ourselves, can come up with ways to support innovation, to inspire innovation, to reward innovations, but also to give a lot of these young people that I was talking about when I said we have the Lost Einsteins an opportunity to take part in this, but most importantly, have the resources they need. Every time I go to the rural areas and talk, you be amazed at how great the ideas they have. But you can have the best idea, you can be brilliant, but if you don't have the resources, it doesn't change anything. So the resources we need to find a way of making sure that they reach the people that they are intended, but most importantly, strengthening the education system so that to make sure that we don't keep talking about the fourth industrial revolution. There's something that is coming. It's already here. It's already affecting us. It's already dividing us. We're already seeing the impact of what it means to be offline, what it means. I mean, if you have to do a research, you've got internet and everything, you can do anything. You can access Google. There's so many resources that a child that has access to the internet can do. So and sometimes, as I said earlier, like, you know, people assume that when I said basically creativity is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. The equality of opportunity has to be the most important thing that all of us strive for, specifically to make sure that the future of our children is better than ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Lindiwe. Given the fact that you have a little bit of your time left, about 3 to 4 minutes, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about what are you doing yourself to reduce inequality in the digital inclusion space, and why did you start this initiative?
Okay.
Just another 4 minutes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. I started Africa Teen Geeks in 2014, and the intention was to teach children from disadvantaged communities how to code, and most importantly, to expose them to opportunities that are available in tech. And one of the things I love about technology is that it's one of those few industries where you don't need any money to come up with your minimum viable product, which is something that keeps a lot of township entrepreneurs from starting their business because they don't have the startup. All you need is basically the sweat capital. That's all you need to be able to. So my vision was to really go in the townships and teach the kids. But I soon realized that we were not able to reach the children we wanted to, because we were lucky that we were supported by UNISA, who provided their labs nationally, 24 labs that we were using for free. So we will call, make a call and get kids to come, but the majority of the kids were coming were not children from the township, and purely because their parents could not afford the transport. And that's when we started, for me, it was, we need to get the, coding and robotics in the Department of Basic Education, but also understanding that, there's a lot of issues of bread and butter that DBE has to deal with. And so when we went to them, we're like, okay, we are willing to work with you to develop the curriculum. We will raise the funds that you need for you to be able to develop the curriculum, but also work with you in implementing to make sure that it reaches everybody. And I'm happy to say that actually in January this year, we finished the curriculum, and few weeks ago it was signed by the DG. Now it's going to Umelusi. And for me is that the joy is that every child, irrespective of where they come from, will be able to learn how to code. And once we can be able to sow the seed, and get them excited about it and expose, because, you cannot aspire to what you haven't seen. So if they can get them to be excited about it as early as possible, we can have an opportunity to improve the STEM results that we have in the basic education, but also improve the interest of children in townships and rural areas to pursue opportunities in STEM. So that has been something that I've been really passionate about, and now we are in the process of training teachers, also with support of donors, that because the vision is to make sure that we know that you can have the best curriculum, but if you don't have the best teachers, you can't. And we wanted to make sure that we work with DBE in putting together a plan that will make sure that the teachers are fully trained and competent, and most importantly, comfortable in teaching the curriculum.
Thank you, Lindy, for what you're doing, and thank you for your contribution to this. I'm not going to ask you further questions now. I'm going to just let everyone speak, and then, depending on how many questions are being asked in the room, I will make an executive judgment whether I should ask any questions personally. I'm now going to go to Professor Fatah, Aslam Fatah. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you, Professor Madansela, and the rest of the panelists. Ms. Lindiwe Matlali has, I'd prefer to listen to you at this stage. You've taught us already a new word, tech exploitation, the necessity only of exercising your sweat capital. And a very important point that I have to think about, because I think it is completely accurate, that opportunity is not equally distributed in this country. For me, conceptually and metaphorically, that explained to me a lot about how we have to think about the fourth industrial revolution. So thank you very much. I'd love to listen to you further on. I have been doing a fairly large project over the last 18 months on for the fourth industrial revolution and education. And I've also, for the last 12 months, served on the ministerial task team for the Department of Higher Education on education and the fourth industrial revolution. And I say the one thing that I've had to do to survive and begin to understand and engage in the 4IR space is that it forced me to read about the history of technology, about the history of education policy, about much deeper understandings of how the world works relative to the various economic development epoch and phases that had gone through and so on, before I could really actually get to the topic of education itself. With that particular point, I want to suggest to you that we are standing on exceptionally complicated ground. And there's a lot of popular rhetoric that goes on about it, that some of them are very helpful. Others might not be that helpful. But the big question that we have to ask is, how do you understand the discourse and the wording called Fourth Industrial Revolution? And how do you respond to it? And I think we have to at least be able to do three things at the same time in response to that question. Or let me put it more evocatively, we have to be able to sing three songs or have an orchestra with three sets of instruments in it that plays at the same time, not one after the other, but at the same time. And that is, you have to be able to develop a critique in respect of what 4IR means and how it moves into a society that is uneven and reproduces that inequality. However, given that, you also have to understand that you need to appropriate what the 4IR makes available to you and begin to adapt and adopt some of the affordances of it. And then thirdly, you have to also get into the space of innovation. All these three things at the same time. So moving beyond cliches, what I've come to understand this 4IR has come to mean is that it signified a fundamental redefinition about what it means to be human and our planetary existence at this particular moment in time. Someone has defined it in the following way, and that is that when we lived in a previous age, which has come to an end about 30, 40 years ago, that age was dominated scientifically, research-wise, by human conceptualization, human beings in charge of the conceptualization over the implementation of research and development and technology. That has now been overtaken over the last 30 years, and particularly over the last 10 years, by what this scholar calls a techno-human rationality that's emerging. So it's not just simply human beings that are in control of the conceptualization of what happens in the world, but it's that fusion between technology and humanness that is beginning to construct how we operate in the world. In that case, we speak about artificial intelligence, we speak about machine learning, we speak about robotics, we speak about automation, and so on and so forth. And the big issue is that we're speaking about technology that doesn't develop in linear ways, but technology that developed exponentially from all over the place, and they move into directions that is sometimes uncontrollable. So what we found is the capitalist phase that we're in can be described as a techno-dominated capitalism or cognitive capitalism that has replaced material capitalism. The idea that you take materials and build stuff is now superseded by the idea that you use your intellect, your mind, your cognitive capability and the cognitive capability of the machines in order to make stuff, and that is the work doing. So what is that meant for jobs? Well, it is clearly meant, if you look at the job figures over the last 10 years, that jobs in the so-called repetitive sector have become automated. And if you look at jobs in the repetitive sector, there's been a lot of job shedding. So this big job loss has taken place, and that's threatened vision in a very profound way, exacerbated by COVID circumstances and lockdown. That's the kind of jobs that's being shed and being lost. What has taken its place is what people are showing through job acquisition and new jobs is jobs in the creative industry. In other words, the ability for human beings to develop the creative intellectual capacity that gets turned into skills that's required in the fourth industrial revolution. This has fundamental implications for our education. It has implications that I'd like to speak of later, for the educational architectures by which we now do education, for the curricula that we're implementing, for the way we develop our pedagogies, and for the platforms that we are using. So I just want to end off by mentioning some of these implications. Firstly, what is rapidly beginning to emerge, and COVID circumstances exacerbating, is that we are now moving into a more blended learning and blended platformed educational approach. And it uses various approaches. It's the institution, but it's also an open loop system that relates learning in the institution to the workplace, that relates learning to different institutions, that understands learning as the scaffolding or the building up of many microcredits across a longer span of time, not 3 years and 4 years anymore, but you could conceivably think of an educational qualification as happening over 10 years, that combines a college education, university education, workplace education, online platforms, and so on and so forth. And that is what is beginning to emerge in the educational space internationally. And my argument is that under COVID circumstances, that is going to increase. Your education will not simply take place in one anymore, because that's the kind of education that will lead to your redundancy in this particular environment. So what we are seeing pedagogically are flipped classrooms where learning takes place where the individual is, where learning in groups, off-site, on-site, and so on happens, where we are targeting what is called generic skills, creativity, technological literacy, the ability to engage in with human beings in productive ways, and so on and so forth, and also different disciplinary knowledges, different transdisciplinary knowledges coming together in smaller bits and pieces to constitute programs that we will have to do. I think one way of thinking about all of this, what could amount to gibberish if we're not careful, is to think about how it would affect me over the next 30 years of my working life, and what kind of skill set I would need to survive over the next 30 years, and what kind of educational processing over the next 30 years through lifelong learning I would have to engage for the kind of work that will be emerging. So what would that kind of work be? Well, it would be work in the creatives industry, it would be works in the cognitive industry. And the final point I want to make is when you speak to a national system, you've got to build this multi-open loop platform on a basic education that teaches solid literacy to all our children, literacy, mathematical literacy, scientific literacy, and very importantly, what is now technological literacy from as early as possible, but to make those foundations solid. The one thing that we want to avoid when we leap into this educational platform that the fourth industrial revolution requires of us is to undermine what schools have to do to provide the technological, the language, the mathematical, scientific, and the human literacy for you to, for the rest of your life, build your educational upgrading, upskilling, and educational alignment to the new world of work out there. There's a relationship between a good education and a responsive, lifelong sort of education that cuts across various institutions into the workplace, and using of different modalities of online pedagogy and so on and so forth. So having said all of that, in a nutshell, we are in precarious times. We are in exciting times. We are in times where we are not 100% sure where we are going or of which we are in control of, but certain patterns of emergence have already positioned the new educational architectures and the new educational behavior that we have to engage in order to adapt very rapidly to the space that we find ourselves in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Fatah. I'm going to call Miss Kate Walker to the floor. Over to you, Miss Kate Walker, and Mr. Swart, you will take the last ones there. Over to you, Kate.
Great, thank you very much. So I just want to make my first point about evolution in general as a human species. So generally, we think of evolution as something that happens along a linear pattern. But biology has shown us actually that it takes on more of a tetration type of function in the way that it seems to happen very, very slowly over a extended period of time and then accelerates exponentially when we are in periods of crisis. I do not think that I speak alone when I say that we are indeed in a period of crisis at the moment. And it is therefore a very ripe opportunity for us to evolve. What we are seeing here in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and the fourth industrial revolution working hand in hand is the blurring of the physical and of the digital worlds. And this has not only shown us how reliant we are already on 21st century technology, but the extent to which we need to trust it more or perhaps question our reliance on certain aspects of the technology. But we should not look at this necessarily as a negative, but as an opportunity to move forward. We need to, as we have done in the past, purposefully and at scale adapt our environment in order to meet our needs. And this is something that South Africa has proven to be very, very good at, and in times better than Europe. Speaking from anecdotal evidence, I spent a year in France in 2017, and moving from a country, South Africa, where I was able to process online payments very, very easily over my FNB app, I moved to France and then found out that the fact that they had now suddenly developed a banking app where you could only really view your balances was very novel technology to them in 2017. We have one of the most advanced banking sectors in the whole world in terms of service, but also in terms of digitization. And it is with this type of culture that we should be moving forward. While first world countries like Italy, for example, suffer stumbling blocks in terms of the fourth industrial revolution because of firms or people that are slow adopters, or even firms or people that have financial dependence on maintaining the status quo, South Africa will deal with these stumbling blocks as well, but will also deal with the stumbling block of education. And unless we can make radical changes to the way in which we approach education, not only in its nature, but in its form, we will further fragment our socioeconomic position. But it is my opinion that this is not solely the role of the tertiary institutions. This is something that, in terms of academic research, has mainly focused on tertiary education. For example, my undergraduate, not dissertation, but legal skills paper, I looked at the way in which legal education needs to be reformatted for the fourth industrial revolution. And indeed, a lot of the literature that I found focused on tertiary educations and needing to bring in more courses on data science, on blockchain, on, for example, a existing example that is being implemented at the University of Tilburg in the Netherlands is coding for lawyers. And that seeks to equip legal students with the ability to understand basic coding so that they can better branch communications with technical teams, as will become more important in the future and as is already quite important in some spheres. This is not only those types of things, which are very, very important endeavors, but students, for example, like myself, who grew up in a very privileged background and who had access to a computer, perhaps as I began to walk, and who greatly enjoyed picking apart the computers and learning how to code at a young age, I'm significantly advantaged over those who only really see a computer for the first time when they step into a university. And this is where we need to do better. We need to harness all spheres of the education ministry in South Africa to expose students and scholars to technology at an earlier age, not only in hardware, but also in the ideas that come from technology. Because as I said, we are seeing a blurring of the physical and of the digital world. It's not only about having a computer in front of you, but it's about the idea that maybe someday we will have computers inside us, whether or not that is a good thing. And that's something to be explored maybe in a different discussion. But what we need to call on, therefore, is to create not only a cohesive and forward-looking education, but also a rehabilitative education. Because yes, we can now start to implement these new forms of technology and talking about these new forms of technology into our education system now, but we need to move backwards as well so that there's a foundation for these people to learn new things going forward. I know that I'm doing a lot of rehabilitative learning myself in basic things like Excel so that I can upskill myself for a new career opportunity, for example. This is the type of culture that we need to also develop in our students and in our workers in South Africa. But, and this is because, as touched on as well by Lindiwe, digital literacy is no longer a nice to have. And it's been a very long time now that it's no longer a nice to have. It's now a fundamental skill and has been for a while. And it's time that we play catch up. And then in closing, I just want to say that I don't think it's enough for us to call on government to implement these changes. We know that of all the actors in the South African society, the government is perhaps the slowest to respond to the calls of civil society. And indeed, we should be placing pressure on them, but we as civil society also need to step up. And this is, one of the beauties of living in a hybrid economy where we have a very active private sector, is that we can actually take action in changing the way that things are happening in South Africa. So, for example, Stellenbosch University has been a shining example of this with the data science school, but we should also rely more heavily on the private sector to boost innovation. We like to think of, the USA and Silicon Valley as being the innovation hubs, but Cape Town in particular has been recognized as the innovation hub of the world, and we need to tap into that and to place more investment, whether that's financial or human resources, into supporting startups that are looking at new educational perspectives.
Thank you, Ms. Ketwater. I now call upon Mr. Derek Swart to give us a legal perspective on all of this. Where is the law, and where should the law be going in terms of bridging the gap on social justice and the fourth industrial revolution? Over to you, sir.
Yes, so thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in this discussion. I'm very passionate about the topic of discussion and thrilled to hear, especially as Professor Fatah unpacks the initiatives that are underfoot to keep us all relevant in this new era. So I'm a legal practitioner by profession. I'm a technology enthusiast, and as such, I get to see a lot of the most innovative and cutting-edge technologies. And even though I really relish the opportunity and get truly excited about what we can achieve, I also fear for the challenges that lie ahead. And I'm not naive as to the big work that is ahead of us to prevent our countrymen, some of our countrymen, from falling behind. So from a legal perspective, as one would typically expect to see, as the changes start to impact our shores, as they reach our shores, there have been some movement in terms of legislation currently on our books or about to go live in force. That would typically be in the area of data privacy, where finally our data privacy legislation is coming into full force next year. And of course, the immense power of artificial intelligence is really much facilitated by access to big data. And more often than not, personal information is involved in that big data. So up until now, there really hasn't been a legal and ethical framework that properly regulates how we as a society want this to be dealt with. And I think many commentators have commentated that left unchecked, there is a real risk of unethical use of these new technologies. And so a legal and ethical framework is very much required. Sporadic interventions have been made. For instance, in respect of algorithmic decision making, we have something on the books at the moment in terms of the Protection of Personal Information Act, which gives some comfort where decisions are made maybe to an adverse decision in terms of credit lending and such environments. There will soon be some protection there. But as a whole, in terms of a broad framework, in terms of how we will approach this from a policy perspective, nothing on the books as of yet. So turning to intellectual property, which is, of course, very important as an enabler for us to participate in the fourth industrial revolution. Currently, we have a decent set of intellectual property laws on the books. The IP that invariably comes out of our innovation activities need to be protected, not only in South Africa, but aligned with other parts of the world as well. So that, I think, is substantially there, but we have been slow to renew the legislation, and many of them are quite dated. I don't want to say anything controversial, but we recently attempted to dust off our copyright legislation, and that turned out to be a false start when it was referred back to Parliament. I might just comment to say that given the effects of globalization, I think it would be an error to write legislation in South Africa that is not aligned with what the international community is doing, unless, of course, we adopt a policy and a clear reasoning why it makes sense not to do that. So also, it's interesting to see, just from an academic perspective, challenges being put to existing legislation in terms of authorship by things like artificial intelligence. That's not unique to South Africa. You see some cases even in Europe now where the law is being stretched and people are asking, well, is it possible for an artificial intelligence author to in fact be an inventor for purposes of patenting and the like? That's an interesting space to watch. Coming back to the social justice aspect of it, though, I fully agree that we need to instill a culture of curiosity and continued learning of technical issues that will keep us relevant as changes occur. And at the moment, in my assessment, the in South Africa has been fairly low, but I'm sure of it that in the remaining time I have to practice as an attorney, vast areas of what we currently do as attorneys will be fully automated. Any essential repetitive task, of course, is ripe for the picking, so to say, and the only thing that we can really do to keep ourselves relevant is to have a continued learning and upskilling program. And so, as I said at the start, I'm delighted to hear from Prof. Fatah that that is the sort of thinking that's being put forward. I think that'll really serve us well. As for people that have not had the opportunity to really take part in our formal economy, I'm also delighted to hear about the initiatives of Lindiwe and people like her that really try their best to bring people into the fold. It's commonly known that especially blue-collar workers are at great risk, given that the advances in automation often target that area of your formal economy. I also want to say that I think Kat is correct in saying that it's a shared responsibility. We all have to play our part in making sure that we move forward together. I think there's a real risk that if we don't wake up and take hands on this issue, that the gap between the disenfranchised and the people that enjoy the benefits of the current economic activity will be further, there would be a bigger divorce between the two of them. And ultimately, I think no one wants to live in a country like that. So I will conclude on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Derek Swart. And thank you to all of the panelists for sharing your wisdom. We started with Miss Lindiwe Matlali telling us that opportunity dances with those already on the dance floor. Creativity is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And essentially, all of our speakers have indicated that the fourth industrial revolution brings us technologies and innovations that have responded to many of the challenges of our time, but in the process brought new challenges. And among those challenges is exacerbating inequality. And I think the last speaker, Mr. Swartz, is saying that if we don't act fast to reduce that inequality, it is going to get worse and it is going to end up in an ugly divorce, even going further to saying nobody wants to live in a country like that. And that's the whole essence of social justice. And that's the whole reasoning behind SDG 10 in the Sustainable Development Goals, or the so-called global goals. The idea is that if we continuously leave some of us behind, pretty soon they will fight back. And it doesn't matter where are they left behind, because as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. But they all have also shown us examples of work that is being done to push back. In the area of policy, and with Lindy saying that digital literacy should be one of the pillars of the education system, and Ms. Kate Walker supporting that, and Professor Fata making it clear that this should also go into the space of university education, and indicating that there are worrying gaps in access to these technologies and access to the opportunities that these technologies are creating. It is now an opportunity for you, dear colleagues, to engage with our panelists. You can ask them questions. You can add your own point of view. I see there's already a hand up. Let's see, who is that? Oh, I am going to first ask Mr. Oh, Mr. Swart wants to say something quickly. Then I'm going to ask Nemakanani, Mr. Nemakavani, to speak, and then
Nemakavani.
Nemakavani to speak.
Yes.
Can we start with Mr. Swart? Mr. Swart, it looks like you want to say something, sir.
No, 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 thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna go to Miss Nema Kavani. Please say something, and then Emil, you will let us know what is in the write-up that needs to be responded to. You have a minute, ma'am. 60 seconds.
Okay. Okay. My name is Takarani. I have a question to Lindy, where I must say I'm also very proud of her work, and I've been her follower for the past few years. So I wanted to ask her if she does need extra hands or volunteers for some of her initiatives or projects. I must say I've been an analyst programmer for years now, and I've worked in more in the ECM space, which is enterprise content management, and I've dealt with RP and OCR. So I believe I can make some contribution to some of the initiatives, but I've, however, tried to reach out. I've used also some of the contact details that are listed on the social pages, but I have not been successful so far.
There you have it, Miss Matlali, Lindy. You have a volunteer, and already all of you have said this is not a job for government alone, it's not a job for business alone. We need all hands on deck. Do you have a response to that, Miss Matlali, Lindy?
Thank you so much for your offer. Please, you can email me directly on lindywe at africateengeeks.co.za. Your email may have been, sort of lost with the thousand of emails that we get. So I apologize, but I will definitely respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question from Dr. Almarie Malek that she asked, the question is, how can we assist parents and teachers to appreciate the innate scripting of and identify the uniqueness of each individual young child's creative potential, intellectual, artistic, technical, etc.? And another question from her as well, how can we balance technical with relational competencies? If one of the speakers can just react to that.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask if Prof. Fatah, do you want to take a bite at that? And then we can then have Miss Lindy Matlali, who is already training these young people on coding um, and the design and robotics.
Yes, I would look forward to her response as well. A very quick answer would be to say that it is very clear that in a fourth industrial revolution space, where technology is ubiquitous in our lives, it's all over from a very young age. Of course, as parents, we have to learn how to discipline young people with respect to the use of technology, so that they don't overwhelm themselves and disrupt their own development in respect of it. So there's a big question. So that's my first answer. You cannot necessarily ban technology from children's lives, but parents will have to learn how to develop a regulatory basis upon which they can use it. That's firstly. Secondly, but given the openness of technology, open use of technology, it has a knock-on effect on how schools are currently working. 20 years ago, we didn't have this, so there was quite a sealed relationship off between home and school, and the school could basically get on with teachers teaching, using textbooks and giving homework and checking homework the next day, and so on and so forth. Now, 60 to 70% of the actual learning happens in the informal spaces of children's lives. So the big question when we want to hold that holistic balance, here's one lead, is to understand as teachers how to access what kids learn online and off classroom, and to bring that into the classroom as a valuable affordance, as a valuable literacy, in respect of which they do the school learning. So there's got to be a much more dynamic relationship between school learning and learning in ubiquitous spaces outside of the classroom. The most important point that leverages that is the competence of the teacher. So teacher education, to teach differently, becomes the most important challenge in this particular space.
Thank you, Prof. Lindy, over to you, Ms. Matali.
Thank you so much. I think when it comes to regulating kids on the use of technology, for example, I wouldn't. I'm not the expert on that. My children actually are always on the computer, but I found ways of making them earn the time. You know, they have to finish a work, then they get then to do whatever they want. But I agree with Prof with the importance of training our teachers properly. And I also know that the challenge is that, you know, for teachers in townships, for example, if you have 70 children in your classroom, it's very difficult for you to get to understand all of them and even understand how they learn, because children do learn differently. But with the introduction of coding and robotics, the good thing about with coding is the kids, they get to do what they want. So you get to also identify the kids that are more creative for them to be able to express themselves. But the most important thing is really educating our teachers to be able to identify talent, because not every child, you know, is going to become a doctor or even a computer scientist, and we need to understand that. But you know, but every child needs to be able to read. One of the big misconceptions that I've seen a lot is the assumption that, for example, children who are creative don't do well in STEM. And that is actually not true. What we've seen as children that are very good in literacy, in, you know, in arts, tend to be also very good coders as well. Because if they're going to be great writers, writing takes logical thinking, and those are the skills that you need when you code. So it's very important that the teachers have to be, you know, trained well to be able to identify talent and understand, you know, the differences in the way the children learn, but also account the challenges that we have and maybe coming with solutions on how then will that happen for a child, for a teacher who's got 70 kids in a classroom.
That's something new. I hadn't learned that creative thinkers automatically would be good at coding, but now that you say it, it makes a whole lot of sense. From what we're hearing, we need a policy adaptation to bridge the gap, the equality gap when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution. We need an upgrading of infrastructure to make sure that all villages are reached. We need an upgrading of digital technologies or access to digital technologies and connectivity. But we also need a reskilling of everyone, particularly the teachers and those children that were not able to get to play on computers at birth, as we have been told by our panelists, particularly Miss Kat Walker. Thank you, Ms. Matlali, for that answer. I'm going to ask again, Mr. Vikil Emil, to read us a few more of your questions. But if you can put up your hand, please do so. This is Teams, and therefore you have space to speak in your own voice if you would like to. Over to you, sir.
Okay, there's a question from Ms. Davids. The question is, what could education look like when responding to trends or needs of personalized learning, immediate feedback, and changing needs of credentializing certification within the context of the fourth industrial revolution?
Wonderful. Can we tailor-make learning to each child? I think Ms. Lindy was giving us a sense of the teachers need to identify the different talents and aptitudes of children in order to be able to channel them or to harness their potential appropriately. But I'm going to throw it back at the panelists. Ms. Matlali, Lindy, if you want to answer, you can answer, but so can everyone else on the panel.
Okay.
I
Thank
keep
you.
leaning on you because you are teaching already, or your agency is in the teaching space already. Yes.
We actually are already doing that. The platform that we are using for the introduction of coding and robotics is a platform that we built from scratch called Miss Zora. Is an AI-powered VR being that serves as a personal tutor to the learner and an assistant to the teacher. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, that we have to teach when the curriculum will be introduced from grade R to 3, and in foundation phase, the teacher teaches all the subjects, and you need to make sure that they are comfortable and competent, or otherwise they will always fall back. So we ensured that for them, to make it easy for them, that most of the learning will be done by the learner themselves on the platform, and being able to ask questions on Miss Zora, taking a lot of stress and anxiety from the teacher. But what it does for the teacher, they're also able now to identify the kids that are just the whiz kids that can just fly through, and we're hoping that they can also identify those who need support, and they can pay attention to the kids based on their needs. And that's the vision that we're hoping, as we implement the coding on robotics, and hopefully if it gets implemented, and it's successful, we hope that then we can then assist the department for the other subjects as well, to enable them to get that instant feedback, but most importantly, to intervene on time. Because now they have to wait until a child is in grade 12 and they fail, or school, all the kids fail, and like, oh, what happened? But it's too late. So if they can see a problem that, and they can then do targeted interventions on time.
Thank you, Lindy. Ms. Walker, Katie, you wanna augment that response? You have the floor, ma'am.
Well, thank you. I just want to respond to each of the points that Ms. Davids raised. So in terms of personalized learning, I think it's very easy to look at digital learning as kind of a streamlined approach of just providing a one size fits all type of education. But I think that we can actually take the opportunity to provide a more personalized education very, very well if we structure the educational system properly. A small example of this in a very elementary setting is that in Switzerland during COVID-19, each of the kindergarten teachers were required to do check-in FaceTime calls with their students. Now, this is something that is obviously very, very time-consuming, but when we can restructure the educational system in a way that we are giving more support to teachers in the more menial of tasks, they are able to dedicate more time into actual training in a more personalized nature. So I think that is indeed something that we can look at and that we need to focus on in our policy restructuring. In terms of immediate feedback, however, I think we need to be very, very careful, because the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that I think we will face in the fourth industrial revolution is the removal of this human element, whether it comes to job processing applications or it comes to teaching applications or any kind of web-based, computer-based applications that are running to interact with students or with job applicants or with any other person on the other end of the screen. Very often a program at this point in time cannot interact with data in the way that a human can. And this is the issue with immediate results. And so for the moment, I am hesitant to introduce immediate results for education. And I think that teachers should take the time that they have usually taken, and really just whether they are doing it in a complementary fashion to a computerized results system, or whether they are taking it completely upon themselves to give feedback. I think that is a system that should still be in place. And then with regards to credentials, I think that this is an amazing opportunity for us to really be sure of who is teaching our kids and whether they have the correct certifications. And, this is one of the beautiful things about the systems that we are introducing into the world, like blockchain, is that it is almost entirely infallible when it comes to credentials. And this is a great opportunity for education going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat Walker. Basically, the answer from both Lindy Matlali and Kat Walker is that it is possible to have differentiated education arrangements for each child, but you'd have to prepare the teachers accordingly. I do think we also have to deal with the small matter of unavailability of resources in certain communities and in certain families as part of the legacy of inequality in this country, but also as part of the legacy of inequality globally. I think one of the things that our panelists dealt with was also inequality between countries. And hence, I think it was Mr. Swart and Professor Vattar who spoke about the importance of South Africa bridging the gap between itself and the rest of the world as well. Right. Mr. Emil, do we have more questions?
There's just 2 comments from Dr. Buerta. She says that teacher training also includes student teacher training. Thus, undergraduate and postgraduate programs should respond to this. And then another comment by Almari Malek. Many thanks for the responses. It would be good to collaborate on this also with relation to early childhood development and parents, caregivers starting already from and before birth, as the first 1,000 days of life, starting from conception, is critically sensitive period for maximizing the trajectory for fostering creative brain potential in a responsive caregiving environment. The building blocks are often missing from the bottom of the life course.
Well, thank you, Emil, and thank you to the colleagues that have submitted those comments. And of course, that goes to the remarks of Lindy Matlali, who said opportunity dances with those who already are on the dance floor. And obviously, we've heard stories about those who were born with a computer and who played with a computer, and those whose first acquaintance with a computer happens at university. I've met people whose first acquaintance with a computer was working for me, and to take them from square one to just get them to use this monstrous machine and to find things on it. Right. I don't know if panelists want to comment on the comments.
Professor Madonsela, I just thought I'd offer a reflective comment, something that struck me. Also, there is Mr. Swart who wants to say something.
Sorry, Professor, I don't want to hijack your point, but I'm intrigued to ask you in your work if we say that we're dealing with an upskilling challenge on a national scale, in a time where economic resources are very much under pressure. COVID did not do us any favor, and even pre-COVID we were under pressure. If we then say that the answer lies in taking hands, the talents that we do have, and as I said, I have the privilege to see these people. They are absolutely world class. In part of your work in mapping out how we will bridge this skills challenge, is there room for policy at national level that invites industry to also help in this educational challenge? Because I think if you speak to industry, you'll find people like me and others are incredibly keen to pull people into the system. But again, not to be controversial, our politics are very divisive at times. And perhaps all that it takes is someone to bridge that and to forge a way ahead, if I may ask you that.
Professor Madonsela, may I answer that very, very wonderful $1 million question?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that generous question. It is the most important question that confronts us. So the critique of the South African state, if not the government, the state, its various departments, the way it functions and so on, is that it has suffered in the respect of delivering the infrastructural capacity for mounting a response to the development challenges, integrated response for the development challenges that we're confronting. And that integrated response, presumably, even in policy documents that's committed to the SDGs, asks of us to mobilize all our energies across all our social, economic, and policy sectors in an integrated and in a responsive manner. That is, in a sense, the political mandate that stays, that's the 1994 mandate, which we are struggling to fulfill. In the space of 4IR and the upskilling game, it stands to reason that that kind of synergy that we're speaking about has to leverage the response. But it is precisely in the state, in the big sense, overall infrastructural and policy inability to bring people in a socially cohesive set of partnership arrangements together, wherein lies the big challenge and the big gap in our society. This is the kind of political imperative that we have to support. That social cohesion, that social compact that we have to generate amongst the various partners. So indirectly answering your question, in our ministerial task team report, which hopefully will be released soon, it's final, we make exactly the kind of regional and local responses and joined up connectivity amongst various state, private sector, social sectors, political sectors, unions and so on, youth institutions, so that they can operate on economies of local scale and then upscale it. So for example, in the Western Cape, in Stellenbosch, we have an agricultural economy, but that agricultural economy only absorbs X amount of labor. And therefore, the upskilling is kind of narrowly defined in respect of that kind of labor demand. But that kind of local economy has to begin to innovate to make other kinds of connections that we grow in, for example, like manufacturing industries, in other kinds of industrial developments, and so that we diversify the Stellenbosch agricultural economy to a more localized sort of post-industrial economy that can absorb 100,000 other people, in which we can attract local capital, private capital, the government's capital. What we require of the government is to provide us policy leverage, infrastructure. Governments can't produce jobs, but government can provide the incentives and the policy instruments to get us. So at the middle of all of that is technological infusion into kind of, and so the report argues that we have to have these regionalized, the localized economic responses along the local economies and creating the supply and demand in those local economies that can generate via technology, via fourth industrial revolution, kinds of automation, machine learning, algorithmic reason, the kind of political economy that is able to generate skills, to generate demand for which the education sector, the universities, the university in Stellenbosch, the schools in Stellenbosch, the technical colleges in Stellenbosch can help stimulate the demand to respond to the skills that will be required in this local economy. It is enormous, but in a sense, that is the only joined up response that I see providing us with the basis to address this particular situation.
Thank you, Prof. I just want to know if any of the panelists would like to have 1 minute closing remarks before I offer my closing remarks, so as to end our conversation in time whilst we still have people in the room. Right, I'm going to go in this order. Kat Walker, any 1 minute closing remarks?
I think not really a closing remark, but more just a placing of emphasis on the call to action in civil society, and really just emphasizing of the reality that we might have to face if we do not take action. We already have an extremely unequal world, and you are living in one of the most unequal and yet one of the most diverse economies in the world. And that diverse economy, it poses a lot of opportunity that we need to not only take hold of, but to take with both hands and, pull forward and look for opportunities that don't exist yet. And as I said in my talk, it's something that falls on all of us. It's something that falls on me in Italy as a South African citizen, and it's something that falls on everyone that is there to step up and see what they can do to promote this kind of new thinking, this new kind of rehabilitative thinking and forward-looking thinking for the future.
Thank you, Ms. Kate Walker. Mr. Derek Swart?
Maybe just in closing, I think some of the first world countries have been playing with the idea of universal basic income as the last stop to preserve social justice in their worlds, given the disruption that is on the way. I think that really just should focus our minds on the enormity of the challenge. I'm very much excited by Prof. Fatah's input that the answer lies at grassroots level engagement. I think if we can get people in a distributed sort of setup excited about empowering each other, that really excites me, and I think that's something I certainly would want to give a try. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Prof. Fatah?
Thank you very much, Professor Madonsela. I am deeply appreciative of the opportunity to contribute, and I think just to connect with Kat, that we are standing on a very, very, very difficult and challenging moment. We cannot throw this baby out with the bathwater. We have to be able to ride this tiger and ride it vigorously via localized, joined up interaction, where potentially everyone becomes a partner to the resolution of this particular problem going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Fatah. Ms. Lindiwe Matlale?
So much, Prof. I would actually like to also echo what the other speakers have said about the call to action for all of us to be involved. We specifically when it comes to education, I think any parent should be actively involved in trying to find solutions and even helping government to to make our education better. Because one thing I know about South Africans, we are really, really good at identifying problems, but not so great in coming up with solutions and starting. And I think the only way we can solve this is that, for all of us, wherever we are, is just to start. You start and that's how things happen, is when you start. Thank you.
There you have it, dear colleagues. Among us in the room, we have had 2 members of the 4IR Commission. We've had a lawyer who is involved in cyber law. We've had a student who is involved in social justice, and all of them. There are threats and opportunities in the 4IR when it comes to social justice. However, the power to harness the opportunities lie in all of us. And that's the whole idea behind the Social Justice M Plan. It is about having all hands on deck to adhere to the constitutional commitment to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society founded on social justice, fundamental human rights, and democratic values. This must be led by government, but it cannot be done by government alone. Business must play a role, civil society must play a role, me and you must play a role. And Ms. Lindiwe Matlale, who has reminded us that opportunity dances with those who are already on the floor, and yet we can do something about placing everyone on the floor. She has challenged us to understand that each one of us has something in our hands that we can use to advance social justice, and that when there is a problem, the solution must start with doing something. I do hope that coming out of this room, you, me, and everyone else will start something or scale up something that seeks to advance social justice in any way possible, but particularly in the area of closing the gap when it comes to participation in the fourth industrial revolution, where the distinction between humans and machines is blurred, where biology and digital lines are blurred. But when we know that there are opportunities here to heal the divisions of the world, to bring the world together and level the human playing field. Thank you. Goodbye.